Happy Halloween, everybody! Some of you may notice that this is a re-upload. I found a couple of comments that were more concerning to me than I thought they were going to be, and I had a couple of other ideas, so video is going to be a little longer, but other than that, it's exactly the same. I wanted to catch it early so that I could, not miss out on those analytics. With that being said, enjoy take 2. The engines can talk! A fair number of you watched my Thomas the Tank Engine video essay, and a fair number of you were very welcoming and respectful, and a couple of people that I mentioned in the video showed up to comment, and I was very grateful. Thank you. But it got me thinking about what I could actually talk about to further my place in the fandom and simultaneously open up the opportunity to get ingrained in it on other people's channels. And yes, I was just my own clapperboard operator. I don't have anybody else in the house, man. I consider myself something of a recreational linguist, somebody who is interested by language, voices, dialects, everything that comes out of here, I'm kind of interested in to some degree. So much so that I started learning 2 languages about a year and a half ago, and I'm keeping up with one of them, at least. Ich mag deine neue Wohnung. Gefallen dir die Nachbarn? So sorry, Polish. And that's where my German dubs on my channel came from. The interest of putting something into the world using 2 of my interests of the internet and language to combine them together for a new audience of people. Now I'm going to talk about a different aspect of language in relation to Thomas the Tank Engine and friends. In 1981, when Britt Allcroft was searching for funding from ITV for the creation of her newly conceptualized Thomas the Tank Engine model series, she was also searching for the perfect finishing piece to the original creative vision she had designed from the onset of the project: a narrator. Allcroft wanted a narrator for a couple of reasons. Number 1, technical limitations. The models were already very complicated without having to add in a mechanism for their mouths to open and close and have their own voices, so to save on costs, it was the right decision to make. Number 2, she was inspired by Reverend Wilbert Awdry reading the stories to his own children when they were younger, and as such wanted the episodes to feel more like bedtime stories, calm, and not action-packed and exciting in a time of G.I. Joe and Transformers where every children's program was action-packed and exciting. And number 3, she just wanted it to sound good. Shit. And in 1982, while watching an Australian talk show, she believed she found the guy who would make it sound good.
Tonight, I'm delighted to say that my special guests, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. and Mrs. Richard Starkey, better known as Barbara Buck and Ringo Starr.
The story goes that while Britt was watching this interview, she heard Ringo's deep, calming Liverpool accent and thought that he could relate to children just by the sound of his voice. He said that he had nothing to do with it until he met Reverend Wilbert Awdry himself, and she said that she did not pursue him because of his Beatles fame. She wasn't even a fan of the Beatles when she heard him for the first time. Regardless of the circumstances of his hiring, he was successfully brought onto the project in 1984, in time for it to premiere in November of that year. He talks about his time on the project on an interview in Good Morning Britain.
I was the lady who put it together, Britt Allcroft, came to the house one day and said she had this idea for me to narrate these books. I'd never read the books as a child. I was probably one of the few children who was deprived of them. I read the books and I thought they were fabulous. I thought they were really good books, and also the drawings in the book, the style of them I loved, and she convinced me that they were going to be animated in that style. They weren't going to make them cheap looking. So I thought it'd be a nice thing for me to do, really.
Ringo took the books to his estate, did a demo tape, sent it over to Brit's production company in Battersea, and the rest is history.
Thomas is a tank engine who lives at a big station on the island of Sodor. I'm going to poop at Henry. Where are your coaches then? Thomas looked back. Why, bless me, he said, if we haven't left them behind. They're pushing me, he panted. On, laughed the trucks. Cool, doesn't he look silly? They'll never get him out.
When I was growing up, I had VHS tapes of the original 2 series of Thomas the Tank Engine, narrated by Ringo Starr, and Ringo Starr has always been my favorite narrator. Michael Angelis is a good stand-up. The American versions done by George Carlin and Alec Baldwin have their own propensities to be amazing, which I'll talk about in a second. But Ringo Starr is the original and the really, in my opinion, true narrator of Thomas the Tank Engine. I really wish he would have stuck around so that I could see what his narrow gauge engine voices would have been like, because that would have been hilarious.
It's only a cow. Shoo! Shoo!
Speaking of the American versions, isn't it a little weird that Thomas the Tank Engine had a propensity to have very... what's the word? Irreverent narrators. When Thomas the Tank Engine was receiving United States home movie releases, a new narrator was brought on in the form of George Carlin. You know, the guy who said,
"Rat shit, bat shit, dirty old twat, 69 assholes tied in a knot, hooray, lizard shit, fuck!"
Yeah, that guy. Well, he was quoted in an interview on TV Legends saying that he signed on to the show so that people could see a different side of him from his profanity-laden, adult side.
And I narrated those 2 stories, complete with Scottish accent or English accent or serious guy or working class or whatever. I did all of them. I did 45 of those shows. 45, I think I did of those shows.
"It's too bad," he grumbled. "Percy goes to work at the harbor and I do his job."
Following the cancellation of the show that was broadcasting Thomas on American television, Shining Time Station, and George Carlin's role of Mr. Conductor going with it, the new narrator for seasons 5 and 6 of the model series was none other than Alec Baldwin. Famous SNL actor, writer, the guy who killed the...
"Help!" cried George. "Something snapped!"
Alec Baldwin's narration tenure ended when he divorced his wife in 2002, so to pick up for the hit entertainment era of the series, Michael Brandon was brought on as a narrator, and, well...
Whee! Puffs Scarlowy as he raced down the hill.
Well... let's say the writing didn't do him any favors. Now back over in Britain, a more prolific narrator was cementing his legacy in the Thomas canon forever. Michael Angelis narrated every British season of the show from season 3 all the way up to season 16 when the show had transitioned to CGI under Hit Entertainment and Mattel. And the only reason he said he stopped was because he was getting too old to do it. Now, in 2020, Michael Angelis sadly passed away, and there were living tributes all around the fandom to him, and he is one of the greatest narrators who has worked on the show, one of the most dedicated, and personally one of my favorites. But after Michael Angelis, Mattel was quick to find a very suitable replacement in the form of Mark Morrigan. He narrated both the US and the UK versions of the show from season 17 to season 21. In a time period that we'll talk about a little bit later. But let's look at one of the biggest changes that actually came with the transition to CGI. The engines got their own voices. It's at this point that the characterization of the engines is the most important aspect of what goes into voicing them. Sometimes it can come from where the engines were built or where their real-life equivalents were built. The most obvious example of this is Donald and Douglas, the Scottish twins. They are in-universe mentioned as being built in Scotland, so anybody who gives them an accent that isn't Scottish is just doing it incorrectly, and thankfully every narrator of the original series and every voice actor for the CG series gave them a Scottish accent, and, well, let's say some are better than others.
"You're a muckle nuisance," said Donald. "It's to leave you behind I'd be wanting."
"Come on, Edward. Stop gossiping in the sun when there's work to be done."
But for some characters, it can be a little harder to judge. Thomas is revealed in The Adventure Begins to have been transferred to the island of Sodor from the London, Brighton, and South Coast Railway in his very early days as a station pilot. This is a little different than the canon that Reverend Wilbert Awdry himself puts out in a book titled Sodor, Its Railways and Its People. But nevertheless, comparing the performances of Thomas after this information and before this information leads to a wide range of options for you to choose from, ranging from Ringo Starr just using his normal speaking voice,
I didn't mean to. I was pushed, said Thomas.
to George Carlin giving him a nasally tone to sound almost more northwestern.
Bad luck, Bertie. Now, if you were a steam engine, you would run on a pair of reliable rails.
Now, barring narrators, independent voice actors for Thomas also have a swath of options to choose from, but we'll start with Thomas and the Magic Railroad and Eddie Glenn. Eddie Glenn was selected as Thomas after screen tests concluded that children wanted a younger Thomas to be able to relate to him more.
Really reliable and right on time. Signed, Head of the Railway, Sir Topham Hatt.
When the show first transitioned to CG, the first US voice actor for Thomas was Martin Sherman.
I'm excited, Edward. Sir Topham Hatt has a special for you.
And he made Thomas even younger than Thomas and the Magic Railway. This was to the chagrin of many of its fans. The UK counterpart is Ben Small, and many fans attribute Ben Small as being one of the better individual Thomas voice actors for his truly genuine accent.
Good morning, James. Good morning, Henry. Where are you puffing to?
But far and away, the most celebrated independent Thomas voice actors are those that took over Thomas's voice in an era that we didn't discuss in my original Thomas video essay. Something that fans like to call the Brennersance. Andrew Brenner became the lead writer for the show starting in season 17, and was the lead writer for the show all the way through season 21. He left for a different venture at the end of season 21 before Thomas transitioned into another era we didn't talk about called Big World, Big Adventures, but that's beside the point, because listen to these voices of the UK and US version of Thomas and tell me they're not already immediately your favorites.
We can't just leave it here, Annie. And it is only little. I'm doing it! I'm doing it! I'm pulling a train!
Perfection. Not only are the voices consistent between the US and UK dubs with John Hazler and Joseph May, but you also have consistency with how Thomas's character is originally described. A little cheeky, a little bright-eyed, young but experienced because he was one of the first engines on the railway. All these aspects combined together to create my favorite voice of Thomas in an independent sense. Other characters are even easier to look at in this context. Strictly looking at characterization, Gordon is almost always the large, pompous, jerky one.
Red pants by the track, and they looked like a danger signal.
Henry is commonly characterized as a nervous hypochondriac type, for better or for worse.
My smoke box doesn't feel sunny. It feels stuffed up.
James is the cocky, brassy one.
Of course it is.
Edward is the old, wizened mentor.
I haven't broken down in ages.
Toby is the older gentleman who's getting into his later years.
You make it sound so easy.
And Percy is just the most innocent little creature you've ever seen.
Oh, hero. I've been running into trouble all day.
And others continue in this trend down to the secondary, tertiary characters in a way that can't be condensed into how much I want to talk about. Some of you may have noticed that I omitted a specific show from this section. It's really hard to talk about child voice actors anyway, so I'm not going to touch that, but I will give you this fun fact. The same person who voices Gordon in Thomas and the Magic Railroad also voices Gordon in All Engines Go. So that's pretty neat. And now with all the literal examples out of the way, how about I just talk to you about what I mechanically believe should be a fitting voice for all of the main cast characters. Shall we? What's that? It's a disclaimer. These are all my opinions. I'm not going to tell anyone that their version of any engine's voice is wrong. I simply want to put a landmark into what I believe is the best version of all of the characters' voices in the main cast of characters, solely based on where they were built, who designed them, and what their personality really is like in the show, regardless of what they sound like. Let's start placing pins on a map of England, and keeping vocal notes in a sidebar on the left. Starting with number 1. Thomas was built by the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway in Sussex. The area in southern and southwestern England is part of a region called the Home Counties, where people speak what some call the Queen's English, or what most call English RP, or received pronunciation. Thomas's inspiration class, the E2, was designed as a standard workhorse, although non-standard in that it had longer side tanks and a smaller coal bunker, making it less effective, but giving a working class feel to any accent you would put to Thomas. YouTuber Train of Thought has a great video about E2s in general. A common mistake I see people make when they voice Thomas, and a common mistake that official sources make with Thomas, is they make him too young. Thomas showed up at the Northwestern Railway first. He is literally number 1 for a reason. He should sound experienced, but not old. He is still bright and cheery, but not a child.
Oh, Edward, don't be such a fusspot. Henry will show up for his locals soon, and if he doesn't, that just gives me an opportunity, now doesn't it?
But an engine who showed up to the railway even before Thomas is Edward, who is a K2 class built for the Furness Railway in the late 1890s. Looking at Edward's manufacture actually reveals that he was built in Glasgow by Sharp Stewart and Company, but the Furness Railway mainly ran through the Lancashire region of England. Frankly, the idea of a Scottish Edward boils my blood, so we're gonna ignore that note for now, and stick with the fact that Edward ran in Lancashire, which has its own accent, and it's very similar to a Yorkshire accent, but it has some small tweaks. I would say that age is a priority with Edward's accent, more so than Thomas or any other engine on this list, but you shouldn't make him a grandpa. Like, he is a grandpa, but he's the cool grandpa who looks like he's in his 50s, but he's actually in his hundreds. One could also say that Edward's class was the top link of its time, and could give more power to Edward's voice than initially perceived.
Now, Thomas, you need to remember what Sir Topham Hatt told you. Patience is more important than punctuality. I'm not worried about Henry at all. You're more concerned about the opportunity laid at your wheels.
Now, moving on to Henry, I'm going to mainly stick with his second half of his origin story to keep from confusing the video any further, but know that old Henry could have his own separate voice entirely based on what we're doing here. After Henry's crash in the story The Flying Kipper, he is sent off to the London, Midland and Scotland Railway's crew works and rebuilt into a Stanier Black 5. Stanier Black 5s were built for their size and their performance, not their speed, so a longer, lower voice would suit Henry best. William Stanier himself was born in Swindon in Wiltshire, which brings us back to Sussex and the English RP base that we mentioned with Thomas earlier. But more than that, I want to emphasize that Henry is a blank slate character. You can kind of put whatever flavor you want on top of his base, because from the beginning he was an experiment. Some would say a mistake, but we don't treat Henry like that in this house. And the direction that most official sources tend to go in is making him nervous and hypochondrious. I think this is a bad direction for him to go, but reasonable to understand given his past with his failed original design. But I see Henry moving on from his flawed design into a more confident design of himself in later series, in later episodes, and in the tone of his voice. Confidence should be instilled in his speech.
Good morning, Thomas. Good morning, Edward. So sorry for such a slow start. I was having trouble getting my fire going.
but I should be all set for my local. I'll see you at the sheds. Confidence that comes in excessive amounts from Gordon, an LNER Gresley-designed A1 Pacific. A majority of the A1 Pacifics were built and designed at the Doncaster Works in South Yorkshire, which introduces us to a whole nother British accent and dialect group, the Yorkshire accent. Now, a lot of people don't give Gordon the full Yorkshire treatment because Nigel Gresley was born in the English RP area of England, much like Henry and Thomas were. So it makes sense to fit them all into the same language and accent family, but I would personally love to just hear someone make Gordon full Yorkshire, just to see how it would sound. Gordon's characterization leans heavily into the A1 Pacific's design for strength and speed, leading to a lot of people giving Gordon a large, pompous voice, but also a massive ego. I would stray away from this if you're trying to give Gordon a different voice, and give him more of a humble, learned approach.
Thomas, my friend, would you be so kind as to go and fetch my express coaches? We have a lot of places to be, and no engine can afford to stand idly chattering with their co-workers.
And on the flip side of humble, you have our next character, James. James is a lightly modified Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Class 28, built at Harwich Works. Real-life Lancashire-Yorkshire Railway Class 28s lack the two-wheel front bogie that James has. Now, James has always worn his personality on his sleeve. Bogey. And he loves to talk about the fact that the railway doesn't think he's capable of doing the jobs he thinks he is, even though he's a mixed traffic engine. Now, by design, a lot of the engines on the railway are mixed traffic engines, but James's outspokenness about this fact has led to a lot of people giving him a bossy, jerky, brassy tone when giving him his voice. But a mistake that a lot of people make when doing James's voice is they make him too Welsh, when in reality, you need to go Scouse, aka the Liverpudlian accent, or the Lancaster accent that we've already discussed with Edward. Welsh is not a bad direction to go with James to make him different in his outgoing personality, but go for Scouse. Whoa, where's everybody going? Gordon complains about the indignity of it all, and you go help him, and leave me to arrange my own trucks. Honestly, it feels like you lot treat me like a common tank engine sometimes. No offense, Thomas. James has always pretty consistently been the same character with the same voice in every adaptation of his appearance, whether it was official or unofficial. The same can't be said for Percy. Now, Percy is a little bit of an oddball. He doesn't have a real-life inspiration. Some people will say that he's based on a pug tank or on various different 040 tank engines from the southwest of England, but in his backstory and in his canon architecture, he doesn't have a real-life inspiration. He's labeled an experiment. Green engines are experiments. Interesting point. Moving on. Percy is young, inexperienced, naive, curious, all kinds of adjectives that tie to somebody who is newly built and nobody knows where they're from. This can lead to some official sources turning him into the baby, someone who has no idea what's going on at all, an overabundance of innocence, if you will, and it's put a mar on a really creative and nice character within the actual story of the golden age of the show. To clarify, these bottom 3 points, I personally would avoid them if you end up voicing Percy in a project in the future. That's alright, James. I can give you a little bit of assistance, long as it means I'm being really useful. Now you just point me to the right siding and I'll arrange them for you like. And finally, in our journey about the main cast, let's talk about Toby. Toby is a Great Eastern Railway Class C53 steam tram built at the Stratford Works, but used at the Wisbech and Upwell Tramway in the eastern part of England. Now, based on our criteria so far, Toby could feasibly have 2 different accent bases. East Anglian, if you want to take his time at Wisbech as his primary accent base, or West Midlands, if you want to take him being built at Stratford as his accent base.
Toby has always been portrayed as one of the wiser characters in the show, and much like Edward, is very old, but unlike Edward, is very roguish in his age. He knows a different subset of wisdom than Edward does, and he uses it to his full advantage. He is more of a daring grandpa than Edward is.
All this nonsensical bickering and whining. I can hardly stand it anymore. Come on, Henrietta, let's see if we've got any more jobs from Sir Topham Hatt.
And in terms of the main cast, I mean, aside from secondary characters, later additions, later fan favorites, fan-made characters, that's pretty much the main cast of the show, right? Achoo! Oh, what the? Yes, it took me quite literally 25.5 minutes and a little bit of re-editing to finally talk about the humans in a show about talking trains. This has caused considerable confusion and delay. To not reiterate 23 minutes worth of content for a secondary set of characters within the show, Sir Topham Hatt, aka the Fat Controller, is the veritable patriarch of the railway. He runs all of the lines and all of the operations on the island of Sodor. He's the one who encourages the engines to learn from their mistakes, the one who congratulates the engines on jobs well done, and the one who basically is the head honcho. As such, all of his voice actors and all of his vocal iterations have had some semblance of authority and boss attitude to them, without going into the territory of, you know, a dictatorship. But Dippy, I hear you asking, how does one voice someone from an island that doesn't exist? It's simple. You voice them as if they're from an island that does. The Isle of Man is a real sub-island in the British Isles that sits in between England and Ireland, which is roughly where the geographic location is of Sodor in most of the source material. So, if you're looking for a good accentual base for Sir Topham Hatt or anybody who was born and raised on the island of Sodor, give them a Manx accent. Now, I bet you're wondering to yourself, Dippy, do you have any recommendations of creators that are doing these voices in the way you've described them that I can watch and practice and learn from? I am so glad you asked.
Oh, I can handle pulling coaches, Gordon. I'm not that old. Yes, but you are notably the weakest engine out of all of us.
Stupid fat controller putting me, splendid red engine, on shunting goods trains. Oh, next time I see him, I'm gonna...
Jay! Poster!
Yeah, I don't want to die, Gordon.
You're not going to. None of us will. Except maybe Edward. And I'll tell you why.
I fucking love the Trampy movies.
Oh, come on!
One of the most compelling retellings of the entirety of the Railway series canon, the TV show canon. There are elements of every Thomas universe injected into every single one of these fucking things.
Oh, have you now? Indeed I have.
From implementing fandom memes into episodes...
Look out for the train!
Look out for the train.
That's not an engine, that's a caterpillar on wheels. Where's the rest of it? Thomas!
To expanding upon reasoning for engines' actions in stories that are boiled down to one sentence in the books.
Wait a minute, what are we doing?
We're going to teach Sir Topham Hatt a lesson for once. He's going to learn just why tender engines do not shunt their own trains.
What did you just say?
I said Henry's not going, sir. Neither am I. Not until you listen to what we have to say.
Oh my god, we're dead.
To the audio editing that is so crisp you could eat eggs off it. I mean, just watch this sequence from Trampy Movie 12.
How do you signal when you even get employed? Oh my god, what the...
Get out of the way!
Oh, shit!
Wake up! Wake up now!
What?
Oh, driver, where you at?
Reverse! Reverse! Move!
Oh, what's happening?
There's gonna be a head-on collision! Switch the points now!
I'm getting out of here!
Percy, wait for me!
Every episode is simply a mastercraft, and I cannot wait for the... What do you mean the 14th one is already out? Shit, now I have to go watch it. Listen, I hope you learned something from this video. I hope it was entertaining. I've got more important stuff to do. Go watch Trampy. Go subscribe to him. Subscribe to me. And as always, until the next video, just for God's sake, just watch Trampy. All right. My apologies that some of you had to watch this video twice, but I appreciate those of you who commented for helping me fix it. Thank you.